So what if I told you that something we thought we knew about politics, like a fundamental assumption about a huge group of voters just, well, it cracked in 2024.
You mean the Latino vote?
Exactly. For decades, it was almost taken for granted,
Oh, yeah.
Latino voters leaning heavily Democratic.
A reliable block.
But our deep dive today is looking at this really seismic shift that seems to defy that whole idea, the significant move of Latino voters toward Donald Trump in the last election.
It's a genuinely fascinating development. Really challenges the conventional thinking, the numbers, the data. They tell a pretty surprising story.
Right. And that's what we want to do today. Our mission is to unpack this traumatic realignment. What were the complex, maybe even surprising factors behind it?
Yeah, get beyond the easy headlines.
Precisely.
Yeah.
We want to give you, the listener, a shortcut to understanding this really critical development. Look at the underlying drivers. Economic worries, identity stuff, the actual campaign messages, even how people get their news now.
It's a lot to unpack.
It is.
Yeah.
So to really grasp where we ended up, maybe let's start with the baseline. Historically, what was the picture? What did we understand about Latino voters and where they usually stood?
Well, for a good long while, they were seen as a pretty reliable Democratic stronghold. I mean, if you look back at, say, 2016,
Okay.
Democrats had a huge lead, like a 36-point advantage with Latino voters. Hillary Clinton got about 65% of that vote, Trump around 29%.
A massive gap.
A massive gap, yeah. And it stayed pretty wide in 2022. Joe Biden won 63%, so Democrats still had about a 31-point edge.
Right. So those kinds of numbers really cemented that idea, that perception.
Absolutely. It made sense to think of Latinos as, by and large, a predictable Democratic group.
Okay, but then 2024 happens and the ground just completely shifts. This is where our sources really deliver that twist, the thing nobody quite predicted.
Or at least not on this scale.
Exactly. So what actually happened? What was it that just shattered those expectations?
Well, the change was unprecedented, really, in terms of how big and how fast it was. Nationally, if you look at key data, say from Pew Research, Axios reporting on it, Trump captured somewhere around 48% of the Latino vote. Democrats got about 51%.
Wait, 48 to 51.
Think about that. That lead, which was over 30 points just 4 years before, it shrinks down to just 3 points. A tiny margin.
Wow.
And Trump's share, that 46 to 48%, depending on the poll, it actually beat George W. Bush's previous high watermark of 44% back in 2004.
So this wasn't just a small bump.
Not at all. It's probably the sharpest single election surge in Latino support for the GOP in, modern history. A jump of like 14 to 16 points from 2020.
That is genuinely staggering. But was this shift sort of even across the board? Or did specific groups within the Latino electorate really drive it?
That's a great question. And yeah, the nuance here is really important. Our sources definitely show Latino men shifted in a big way.
Okay.
Trump pulled over 50% of Latino men in several key exit polls. Edison Research had it at 54%. Some Texas exit polls showed it even higher, maybe 65%.
65%?
Yeah. Now, Latino women also moved towards Trump, but Democrats did manage to keep a slight lead there. Still, a much, much narrower lead than before.
So less of a shift, but still a shift.
Exactly. Like in Texas, again, Latinos went for Trump about 41% versus 58% for Kamala Harris. Still a Democratic advantage, but smaller.
Got it. So this wasn't just some abstract national trend then. Were there specific places, certain regions, where this realignment really showed up strongly?
Oh, absolutely. The regional data really paints a vivid picture.
Like where?
Okay, take Texas. Trump actually won the Latino vote statewide there, around 55%.
Won the whole group.
Won the whole group. And he flipped multiple Hispanic majority counties down in South Texas, counties that hadn't gone Republican since like the early 1900s.
That's incredible, since the early 1900s.
Yeah, and look at Florida, Miami-Dade County.
Right, always key.
Trump became the first Republican presidential nominee to win Miami-Dade since George H.W. Bush back in 1988. He got 55% of the Latino vote there, too.
Okay, so Texas, Florida, anywhere else stand out?
Even in California, right, a place you think of as deep blue.
Definitely.
Trump significantly boosted his Latino vote share there, went from about 29% in 2020 up to 38% in 2024. Latino men at 42%, women around 34%. Still lost the state overall, obviously, but a noticeable jump.
38% in California is still pretty striking.
It is, and maybe the most surprising. New York City, across the Bronx, Brooklyn, Manhattan, Trump polled about 27% among local Hispanics. That's his best result in that area since, like, the Reagan years.
Wow. Okay, so Putting all this together,
Hmm.
what does it actually mean? Why? Why did this happen? What was driving these voters to make such a dramatic shift?
Well, what's really fascinating and what the sources strongly suggest is that it wasn't just one single thing. It was more like a powerful mix of factors.
Okay.
And maybe the biggest takeaway for
Hmm.
this large group of Latino voters, the basic, bread and butter economic issues, things like inflation, the cost of living,
Huh?
those often seem to completely outweigh other concerns.
More than social issues.
Or even
Yeah.
immigration. Often, yes. Economic instability, rising prices. Those were consistently flagged in surveys and reports as the absolute top concerns. People felt it in their wallets day to day.
Huh. That really cuts against the grain of the old narrative, doesn't it?
Yeah.
That immigration is always number one for Latino voters.
It certainly challenges that simple view. Now, that's not to say immigration didn't matter at all.
Right.
Trump's focus on border security, his messaging there, it did resonate with a certain segment of Latino voters, even though it came alongside, pretty forceful ICE operations.
Immigration and customs enforcement, yeah.
For some Latino voters, maybe even many who are citizens or here legally, that tough on immigration stance actually lined up with their desire for, say, rule of law, or maybe what they saw as linked to economic stability. It wasn't necessarily about their personal status.
Interesting. A different perspective on that issue. And what about the Democrats? How did they factor into this? Were voters feeling like the Democratic Party was addressing those core economic worries?
That seems to be a key part of the story, too. A lot of sources point to real dissatisfaction. Many Latinos felt Democrats were maybe over-focusing on identity politics, things like abortion access or climate change.
Important issues, but maybe not the top daily concern for everyone.
Exactly. They felt those issues were emphasized maybe at the expense of talking about direct economic relief, about jobs, about inflation. We saw reporting, for instance, about Latino business owners, say in places like Merced, California,
Uh-huh.
who just felt completely disconnected from Democratic leaders, like they weren't being heard on their core economic struggle.
Feeling of being taken for granted, maybe.
That definitely seems to be part of it. And one other factor we have to mention is media.
How so?
Well, the media landscape is just so fragmented now, right? You've got TikTok, podcasts, WhatsApp groups.
Right. Not just the evening news anymore.
Yeah, not at all. And this decentralization seems to have really helped amplify conservative messages within Latino communities. And that messaging often connected with sort of existing strands of cultural conservatism that were already present in parts of the electorate.
Ah, so it wasn't creating something new, but maybe reinforcing or activating existing values.
That's a good way to put it, reinforcing voting behavior that might have already been latent.
Okay, that's helpful. But it brings us back to what seems like a paradox, doesn't it? This significant shift towards Trump, even with his administration's, very visible and sometimes harsh ICE operations. How do the sources explain that? Why didn't those raids act as a stronger deterrent for more Latino voters?
Yeah, it seems like a contradiction on the surface,
Yeah.
but if you connect it back to that bigger picture we were discussing, it's
Yeah.
maybe less of a paradox and more of a really profound insight into voter priorities.
Yeah.
It highlights how motivations aren't always about just one single issue, even one as sensitive as immigration enforcement.
So other things were just more important.
For a critical mass of these voters, yes. The broader economic anxieties, the desire for order or stability, maybe a connection on cultural values, those things simply seem to carry more weight in their final decision than potential concerns about ICE or immigration policy specifics.
It really forces you to look beyond the easy assumptions about how a group votes.
Absolutely. It shows the complexity, the diversity within the Latino electorate itself.
So taking all this in, what does it mean looking forward for American politics? What are the big implications of this kind of historic shift?
Well, it raises some huge questions, really. First, just to hammer home the scale again, Latino support for Trump jumping from around 32% in 2020 to nearly 48% in 2024. That's a massive 14 to 16-point leap in one cycle.
Just incredible. A historic turn, like you said.
Truly historic. Second, that Democratic advantage, it's basically evaporated, down from 36 points, then 31 points to just 3 points now. That is razor thin, vanishingly small in political terms.
The whole landscape has changed.
Completely. And third, as we've discussed, it wasn't one thing. It was driven by this mix, the economy, immigration messaging, media shifts, local issues, dissatisfaction.
Right. A complex picture.
Very complex, and it underlines that voter identity is complex too. Even something as potentially alienating as the ICE raids didn't override those other powerful motivations around the economy or social values for a large number of voters.
So the big takeaway for the political parties.
I think the biggest one, especially for Democrats, is that the old assumption that Latino voters are just automatically in their column, that's gone. It's outdated.
Their votes have to be earned now, like anyone else's.
Exactly. Earned with actual policy substance, particularly on the economy, and real direct engagement, not just relying on past trends or demographics.
And that really brings us to a final kind of provocative thought for you, the listener, to chew on.
Mm-hmm.
This whole realignment, it fundamentally shatters that old simplistic idea of the Latino vote as some kind of unified, predictable thing. A monolith.
It was never really a monolith, but this makes it undeniable.
Right. It really highlights this broader national resorting that seems to be happening around class, maybe around culture, definitely around economic anxiety. It suggests that in 2024, a whole lot of Latinos voted primarily with their wallets, maybe with their identities in a way we didn't expect, and certainly with their anxieties, not just based on immigration headlines.
It's a huge wake-up call.
It really is. And this seismic shift, it demands some serious thinking, some recalibration from both political parties. Probably means moving towards a policy-first, stereotype-last kind of approach. So maybe consider how this shift could reshape political strategies, the messaging you hear in the elections still to come. What does it really tell us about what voters prioritize in a rapidly changing America?